Thank you, Florian Wüst, for setting the scene so beautifully. I think we will just start a little bit early. Or was there some concluding words you meant to say, Florian? I don't see you because the light is bright. They speak for themselves. So, my name is Elke Beyer. I would like to start the third panel of this wonderful conference, which has been quite enriching in the morning session already. For those who might not know me, I'm a historian focusing on architectural and urban research and teach at Anhalt University since 2023. And I've been interested in spatial arrangements of material circulation and commodity production systems for quite a while, and also in what it could mean to read architectural production otherwise through a lens of care. The title of the panel I'm introducing is Building as Assemblage or Assemblage, and it shifts the focus of attention a bit further towards processes of making and of knowing, what this morning was called consequential knowledge practices, so to speak. It shifts the focus towards the activity and the agency of materials and how to account for it and how to represent it also through drawings, through research. And it shifts attention towards understanding larger ecological interrelations and entanglements and implications when it comes to building matters and materials and the territories that are ultimately co-produced by us and many more agents than us humans when it comes to making matter to material. I'd like to start for setting the scene also with the idea of assemblages. I'd like to quote from a very recently appeared issue of the Efflux journal, which is aptly called Building Assemblage, from January 2026, from the editorial by Aaron Bessler and Julia van den Hout. And they write, if, as Anat Singh describes, assemblage is an open-ended entanglement, a fragile and precarious alignment of life, matter, practice that is provisionally held together, then the types of assemblage that architecture typically acknowledges have too often remained superficial. Aesthetic compositions of parts, fragments collapsed into coherent wholes, and narratives that perpetuate the myth of the single author and consolidate the many into one. The more consequential kinds of architectural assemblage aren't as immediate, but what actually sustains building. They operate across vast technical landscapes that are increasingly distributed and collective, like the gathering of trades maintained across oceans, the time between the quarry and the factory, or the negotiation between global supply chains and local activities. Yet architecture relegates these social and systemic dimensions to the realms of practice and industry. And in the morning panels, we got a quite good glimpse of also how that happened. Our intention here on this panel is to bring together a wider spectrum of perspectives on how to rethink and research architecture and its materials in the present moment, and to bring these perspectives into conversation with the deep dives into Bauhaus matters that we've seen in the morning and early afternoon sessions. And that also includes a perspective on the landscapes and territories co-produced by many. And this, we would think that quite crucial, as Barbara Steiner outlined in yesterday's introduction already, as we stand at a crossroads moment regarding climate transition and building transition, the Bauwende in German, which seems more crucial than ever. And to us, it also seems more crucial than ever to link the reflexive question, how did we get here from the Bauhaus era, to the projective questions, which futures could we be going towards, and how could we be taking care of them? To do so, it seems quite crucial to ask where to locate agency in socio-technological transition processes and in ecological transition processes, and to kind of reflect on what's architects' agency role and how do they collaborate with the many other actors, human, non-humans, which have agency in transition processes. We're glad to welcome our speakers here in the room and online, looking forward to their insights and to the debate with them on future research avenues and directions of architectural and spatial practice. The format of this panel is a bit different than in the morning. We'll have shorter statements and a bit more room for discussion and exchange. We'd like to begin with 4 statements by our invited speakers of about 10 to 15 minutes each. I'd like to ask you to please hold your questions for the discussion afterwards. And we have, for technical reasons, changed the order of presentations. So Hannah Leroux will be third, and Philipp Misselwitz will be our last speaker. I will introduce our panelists and invite them up to the stage individually, and after the final statement, we'll move into a podium discussion. So, join me in welcoming Karola Dierichs and Robert Stock, who are a cross-disciplinary team of speakers who are working at the Cluster of Excellence Matters of Activity at the Humboldt-Universität, Berlin. It's a cooperation between Karola Dierichs, who's currently at the Department of Biomaterials at the Max Planck Institute of Colloids and Interfaces, and also a professor for material and code at the Cluster of Excellence. A guest professor? Sorry, you're shaking your head. Is there? Okay, sorry. Karola Dierichs works in the fields of architectural design, computational design, and designing matter. Previously she was affiliated with the Institute of Computational Design and Construction in Stuttgart, where she's also conducted research in the field of designed granular materials on architecture. Her research integrates the fields of materials design and minimal machines for architectural construction. And the main goal here is to establish architecture as sourced from and embedded in a given environment. Robert Stock, on the other hand, is a junior professor for cultures of knowledge at the Department of Cultural History and Theory at Humboldt-Universität, Berlin. And his main research interests are environmental humanities and dishumanities, digital media, and he's also taking an interest in decolonization processes, especially in the Luso-African region. Recently, he's concentrated on questions of damaged landscapes, Anthropocene temporalities, and arboreal situated knowledges, and I think that in your talk maybe we'll find out a bit more about that. Your talk concerns cultures of co-creation, Syntopia. It will discuss concepts of future syntopic living, and refer to the cohabitation of humans and non-humans when it comes to thinking of materials. So please come up to the stage.
Okay, so now we're good. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's really wonderful to be here. And Robert and I will introduce our joint research project, which has been conducted between the disciplines of architectural design, material science, and cultural history and theory. And we call it Cultures of Co-Creation, Syntopia. So what are syntopic architectures? We consider syntopic architectures as sourced from and embedded in a given environment. So here you see work from our colleague, Dr. Charlotte Wenig, who has collected local pine bark in Brandenburg, processed it with glycerin, and in a way came very close to this work by Vitruvius, who is one of our big role models in working with syntopia, both in his seemingly very geometric and controlled approach. I mean, to build an angled roof in a forest is a bit of a challenge, and this is exactly what Charlotte has been doing. But on the other hand, all the materials are sourced from the environment. Just briefly, syntopia or syntopic has been borrowed from biology. Louis-René Riroir in 1964 established the term, and here in his article it is related to species which cohabitate in one given environment in a friendly or collaborative manner. But there's another notion of syntopia, and that's something that the humanities scholars pointed out to us first, namely to have a common topos, to talk together. And here we use this methodological framework, which I have developed at the Max Planck Institute of Colloids and Interfaces, where we really observe matter, which is at the center, through the lenses of cultural science, material science, and design. We do so not in a rigorous academic format of conferences, but we establish new knowledge cultures. So one of the parts of that was to develop a game that uses cards to question participants from different disciplines on certain topics, such as when will it be used in the future, or what does it remind you of, just to trigger the academic discourse. And all of that centers, as I said, around matter, and here we use objects which are presented alongside with the cards and foster this interdisciplinary discourse. For this process, there is also a role model, which I want to point out, another group which has worked at the start of the millennium on syntopia, working on the intersection of arts and science in one given place. But coming back to those objects in the middle of the table, we work with the notion of the boundary object. The notion of the boundary object has been introduced by Susan Leigh Starr, and these are objects which join disciplines together. They act as anchors or bridges, as she says, and they're familiar enough to all the disciplines, but different enough to establish a critical discourse.
So, thank you so much for having us tonight. It's a pleasure to be here and to share some of our research with you. It was also very nice to attend to the various talks in the morning and in the afternoon, so I learned quite a bit, so I'm very happy to be here. So the boundary, so to say, the boundary object that we are working with, you could call it wood, that from a history or from a material science perspective can be approached quite differently, drawing on a variety of methods and also theoretical approaches. So what I brought you here when thinking about this question of materiality and construction and building, so it's perhaps interesting in terms of assemblage thinking. So perhaps think, how does a certain material structure, production processes, building processes, but you could also think about the people and the non-humans taking part in this. And that was one thing that Bernard Rudowski was thinking about in his 64 exhibition, Architecture Without Architects, where he draws on these different actors and anonymous architecture that also might play a role in the history of architecture. So one of the examples that he gives, perhaps most famously, is the beaver constructing, building a pond through the construction of a dam using branches and logs that he cuts himself or herself, and so to say, also functions or works as a landscape architect. Yeah. Another example would be the mole, the Maulwurf, with his dwellings underground. That is also mentioned by Rudowski in his book, The Prodigious Builders from '77, which I brought here also. So these are examples where natural materials are used in a specific way, and so they could be called masterpieces of composition, as Rudowski writes in his book, or as examples of advanced design. When it comes to the question of forest and wood use, so I mean, timber and wood have been long a construction material in the case of simple architectures like huts or bridges or even larger city assemblages, and therefore they were key for industrialization and also for urbanization. So you see here that they were also that there was a concern for how to manage coniferous and other forests in terms of the insects that were there, and the so-called Waldverderber. That was an issue that came up already in the 18th and 19th century, when certain scholars observed, okay, there was a problem with these forests, with these monocultures, because they had given the possibility of certain insects to thrive. Yeah, for instance, the so-called bark beetle that we know nowadays quite well. So in that time, also these visualizations of the galleries came up, quite unique patterns, in the words of our keynote yesterday. This time not by the shipworms, but by the bark beetle. Yeah, so this whole science of forest entomology was created in the 18th and 19th century. And Julius Ratzeburg was an important figure in this field, and he also he wrote several books about the Ips typographus, about the bark beetle. So different kinds of injurious insects, so not only the beneficial ones, but also these other ones. Yeah, and here you see another time these unique visual patterns. Yeah, Ratzeburg was professor at the Forestry Academy in Neustadt Eberswalde, where nowadays the Hochschule für nachhaltige Entwicklung is situated. And so these books came out as a practical guide and handbook also for the management of forests. And that's perhaps a stark contrast to jump into the present. Nowadays, due to prolonged periods of drought and climate change, bark beetles have the conditions to thrive again, and so to say, similar to the beaver, figure as landscape architects. Yeah, perhaps in a negative sense, because they are changing the landscape quite dramatically, with huge effects on the timber industry and so forth. Yeah, so that's perhaps a different kind of visualization that we have here, with a quite shocking effect. Or you have these graphics on the upper side there, which is based on satellite imagery. So we have taken up this, this issue in our research project that gathers around this boundary object of insect-infested or beetle-infested wood, and have taken several approaches to this, and we combined these artistic, material science, and also humanities-based approaches in an exhibition that was shown at the Kunstgewerbemuseum last summer. And there, so to counter this very visual way of perceiving the crisis through the bark beetle, I collaborated with a blind scholar, with a colleague of mine, Siegfried Saarberg, and we built this sensory box that you see there, this white cube, people approaching, so you could put in your hands and feel the bark beetle gallery, yeah? And you also see Siegfried there. So we had also a model of the bark beetle that was in a box, you know, so you have this issue of the accessibility of a museum exhibit that is also at stake here. Yeah, you remember perhaps the sign language video when you come into here. So you have this question, how do museum spaces can welcome a variety of people with different abilities and disabilities. Last thing. So yesterday in the keynote, there was this question, how can we perceive the shipworms as historical and contemporary actors that influence the lagoon of Venice? Yeah? And so in this case here, I would put at stake the question, so how can we try to grasp the bark beetle as a contemporary actor that is forcing us to rethink wood and large-scale managed forest monocultures as a way of creating sustainable architecture. There might be different answers to this that we can discuss here in a period that might be called the Beetles, where beetles act as mighty foresters, or the empire of the beetle. Thank you.
Okay, back to design. I think we're almost running out of time, so I'll just show you very quickly what we designers make out of the work with a theoretical background. No need to rush? Okay, excellent. So, we have a project called Syntopia. I'm taking it through different so-called material systems, and those are on the left granular materials, in the middle filamentous materials, and on the right hand the bark beetle infested wood. And tonight I will not share the first two projects, but just the last one. If anybody's interested in the other two material systems, I'm happy to share that over a drink later. So the bark beetle infested project is called Syntopia 2, Sodea Harvest. And here in the titling, we critically question the human need for harvesting and making that harvest an economic income. So also here, like in all other projects, we integrate the basics of cultural history and theory, material science, and design. What is important to know is that since 2018, more than half of all timber logged in Germany has been felled due to insect damage. So that has been really a big impact on one of the biggest resources that we have in Germany. What is happening with the bark beetle infestation is actually a manifold process. So the bark beetle goes into the tree and eats the cambium, which is the living zone or where the tree grows. But it doesn't only do that, it also brings in co-infestation, namely blue stain, which is the slightly bluish color which you see coming quasi out of the beetle pathways. So what designers do when they get a piece like that, they start to play. And the way that we work as designers, we work with researchers, so here with Pelin Asa, who is a PhD at our institute, and we work with students. And the first instinct was to say, well, this wood might not be very load-bearing, so let's cut it in small pieces, and we did what we call a topologically interlocking system, which are small geometrically controlled units, which are reassemblable, reusable, and which interlock only through friction. And the PhD student in parallel ran literature research and also load testing, and it turned out that actually the load-bearing capacity of this wood is just almost the same as normal spruce wood if it's harvested early enough. So then we worked with a larger group of students, and we said, okay, maybe considering this wood as structurally devalued is not the right approach. Let's simply order a big log of wood for 500 euros, and that's what arrived. So we went a little bit more from the economic side and said, like, let's take all the budget that we want to assign to the material, see what we get, and then work with those leftovers. The students of TU Berlin then came up with a simple stacking logic of saying, okay, we have a wood that we don't quite know what it is yet, and it is also not dried, so let's use that stacking principle that we've seen in the delivery as a design method. And we were invited to work in the Kunstgewerbemuseum Berlin to make a structure in their inner courtyard, which was inhabited for the first time. And so we used that simple stacking logic to make a niche-like space in that courtyard. And that is a computational design process, which I will not introduce in depth now. We used robotic milling to control the curve. What is more interesting, though, is that we use the indications of the wood, the blue stain, to stack and sort the material. So here the assumption was that the more blue stain, the more water intake the wood has. And that was overlaid with a sunshade analysis, and so the more blue stained pieces were located where there is more sun in the courtyard. We are still in the process of evaluating that structure, but further in-depth tests at the Max Planck Institute have actually shown that every single tree who has been infested by blue stain actually takes up more water than a normal spruce tree. So even though a piece might not appear blue stained, it will take up as much water. That kind of makes our sorting logic redundant, but it's a very interesting scientific finding. Another more culturally relevant aspect of the structure is that we expose the bark beetle galleries, and that is something that in a normal industrial use of beetle-infested wood you wouldn't get. So normally if you find beetle-infested wood in industry, it's actually hidden away. So we decided we want to actually show the bark beetle galleries, we want to show the blue stain, and thus increase the acceptance of that material in society. And for that purpose, we also collaborated on an article together in the social tech journal Tatab, where we used a collaborative workshop in order to come up with distributive systems of beetle-infested wood in a small society, and then calculated potential building systems based on harvest rates over the years. So with that project, we actually address the three realms of the humanities, material science, which works in a slower pace alongside with us and starts to kind of thwart our design ideas, and obviously with design. We also obviously work quite strongly on the very large poles of that realm. We interconnect science and art. Those are more the philosophical aspects of both sides, of the more rigorous sides and the more intuitive side. For future research, we would propose going into new boundary objects, other biogenic material systems, which I've already tested at Weissensee School of Art and Design with several groups of students, where basically the main idea is to say, let's take forest residue, let's take leftover materials, and let's bring them into design, which questions material systems, perception, and also material analysis. So with that, I thank you. I don't think we take questions now, and we hand over to the next speakers.